Anya, thank you so much for joining us here today to chat with Harper's Bazaar Arabia, a little about everything. How are you doing?
Good, thank you. We're locked in London, but no, we're really good actually, kind of getting through this with a smile on my face.
Why have you decided to introduce I Am a Plastic Bag collection now, 13 years after the launch of I'm Not a Plastic Bag in the initiative?
Well, it was interesting when we did the project back in 2007. It was important because people really were just trying to work out what they could do to kind of, sort of deal with this issue of the environment, what they could do as individuals. And the project made a huge difference. I'm sure we'll talk about it. But here we are in 2020, and the problem has not gone away, really. And yet, actually, the question is no longer, how can we raise awareness of this problem of single-use plastic? But the question is actually about circularity. How can we use the 8 billion tons of plastic that are on the planet and just keep them being used in circulation so they don't go to landfill?
So how did you originally come up with the idea behind I'm Not a Plastic Bag and the concept as well? Can you tell us the story in your own words?
Yes, of course. So, well, it was at a time back in 2007 when I think everyone was hearing the word environment, not quite knowing what they could do to make a difference. And we actually had a visit from some people who were writing a book called Change the World for a Fiver. And the idea was this book was lots of little actions you could take to try and benefit the world. And the first action out of 40 was to, wherever possible, refuse plastic bags. And they came to us saying, could we help to really, give some noise to that particular action and to that subject? So it was actually a bit of a light bulb moment for me in the sense that I suddenly thought, actually, we can do something with this. We can actually, I've been trying to find a way to do something. We can actually make a difference. So we designed, very simply, a reusable shopping bag. But we wanted to make it so kind of desirable that it really got some traction and some noise. So we sold it for £5, which was already kind of ridiculous given what we normally do. But we wanted to echo the Change the World for a Fiver, the name of the book. And we put it on, we sort of almost used, if you like, the It Bag formula, which is we put it on some really very supportive celebrity arms. We sold it through some of the kind of best stores in the world. And we did several different launches in different countries with different colours. It went mad is an understatement. I mean, I think 80,000 people queued in the UK on the launch day, and it went on to New York and Hong Kong. I mean, I was locked in a basement because the police were worried for my safety when I was in Tokyo, and in Taiwan, 30 people sadly went to hospital because there was a stampede. So I mean, it really was a kind of a ridiculous project in many ways. But that aside, which is just about creating noise, and obviously no one wants to get anyone hurt, that was awful. We stopped it at that point, obviously. But actually what it did do is make a difference. So if you take, for example, the numbers published by the British Retail Consortium, the number of plastic bags, I think from memory, was 10.6 billion before the campaign and was 6.1 after the campaign. There was a big difference. Obviously not just down to our project, but I think just everyone kind of getting behind this important project of not using single-use plastic. And as a consequence of that, actually what happened is various governments introduced fees for plastic bags in various different territories, and so it sort of rolled on. So I sort of went back to my day job, if you like, feeling that was it was everything, every line on my face was to do with that project, but it was important, and now I'm going to go back to fashion where I'm more qualified. So that's really how it started, and that's why sort of all these years later, when the problem isn't solved, we wanted to revisit it.
I mean, I remember when that bag came out, and you're right, it did start that whole government charging for plastic bags and really did make a difference in people cutting down on their plastic bag consumption. So well done. But how do you take materials that are essentially, recycled water bottles and windscreens? How do you take these materials and make it into something that is pretty much, luxury, trendy it bag?
Well, it took 2 years actually of R&D and of experimenting, because we wanted to create a fabric that was made from bottles that would have been designated for landfill. So each bag is 32 half-litre water bottles. And that's not new technology, but it was trying to find a way to do it in a very luxurious way. So we managed after all this time to develop a fabric that really feels like a beautiful, luxurious cotton drill. The problem we had though was that it behaved so much like cotton, but it actually was getting dirty like cotton too. So we then wanted to coat it on one side. So the inside of the bag is this lovely sort of cotton drill feeling. On the outside, it has this coating, but I really wanted the coating to be recycled. And we managed to find a plastic which is called PVB, which is the plastic that goes between glass on windscreens, which is what it stops if the windscreen shatters. It's the layer of plastic that stops it actually, you know, breaking into the car, holds it together. And we managed to extract this and to have that as the coating on the fabric. So that's the first time that's ever happened, and that was quite sort of complicated. And it's been a very, very challenging project. I remember when the fabric first arrived in Italy, you know, it was all different thicknesses, and you know, it's really been years of development, but a really important project, I think, and only really shows, I think, because I mean, I think this is a very, you know, I think that the situation generally in terms of the environment and the planet, you know, warming up and all the really serious challenges that we have, you know, I mean, COVID is a walk in the park, frankly, by comparison, in my opinion. But it sort of shows what you can do if you put your mind to it and if you use creativity and innovation. And I think that's how we're going to solve some of these issues, which we need to do fast. And obviously keeping materials out of landfill and reusing and stopping waste is really a big part. And all those things really tie together very closely. So I've learned so much. I mean, to the extent that I spent time, for example, visiting recycling centres and landfill sites, just trying to understand and learn about how it actually works. And everyone should go and see how their stuff, their waste is recycled. I mean, I literally think everyone, including children, should actually go and visit their local recycling centre, because it makes you think very differently about how you use things and how you dispose of things. So it's been an amazing learning curve, and it's sort of part engineering and part design and part just making it up as I go along to try and find my way through. But it's been fascinating.
Do you have any plans at all to extend beyond a bag or create any more products or items out of plastic circulation or recirculated plastic?
Well, we're trying to you know, like all these things, we decided rather than sort of have targets and manifestos, which are good and important, we decided just to get our feet wet. That's how we tend to work. We're quite entrepreneurial in that way. So what we're trying to do is in every area of our business, and we haven't covered everything and we're not perfect, but I think it's also, by the way, really important to say it's okay not to be perfect, just get started. It's so easy to criticize people for not being perfect, which makes everyone nervous to start. So what I'm trying to do is every time we do something new is to try and find A, the best way of doing it, B, the most responsible way of doing it, and wherever possible to build in circularity and lessen waste. So for example, we're working now with satins that are recycled satins, nylons, we're just introducing all recycled nylons. We're trying to push the fabric, this beautiful fabric we've developed, into lots of areas of our business. So wherever we can, we're doing it, you know, and we're just saying, let's not worry, let's just crack in and crack on. And I think that, you know, if you apply that sort of common sense approach, it's quite exciting, actually. It's a really nice sort of challenge within your supply chain. And it's not a sort of a very clear path always, because sometimes you think, I mean, we, for example, leather was a really big topic for this bag. We thought, you know, we'd really like to use recycled leather. You know, it's all about recycling this project, all about keeping things under landfill. So we started on this with the Anya Plastic Bag project, trimming it with recycled leather, but actually on quite a bit more research, I realized that recycled leather is actually broken down and mixed back with plastic. And virgin plastic at that. So we sort of thought that's not the right route for now. And then we thought, okay, let's look at plant-based leathers, in inverted commas, things that are replacement leathers, and vegan leathers. Vegan leather is pretty much completely just virgin plastic. And there's some quite interesting plant-based materials that replicate leather, like mushrooms and various different things. But they're, you know, and they're really interesting. We're watching those, but they're not quite there yet for our customer. So I actually came full circle back to leather, which surprised me. And interestingly, we've got to be very careful not to diss everything just in a sort of fashionable way. You know, we all need to do our research, and even the experts don't always quite know. But interestingly, having researched leather, where you use skins that are traceable, so you know where they've come from, so you can ensure there's no deforestation, where you know the tanning process, where you understand about how they're used and the waste, and therefore how you can kind of keep waste out of the supply chain. Actually, leather's a pretty natural material in many cases, and often actually that which is locally sourced to where you're making the bag is often better than a vegan alternative that's basically plastic and shipped in from far away. So, you know, we've got to, all of us, be careful and really not do the jingoistic thing of what sounds right, but actually might not necessarily be right. You know, it's a journey for me too. And so I'm just being really open about what we're learning, and sometimes we'll get it wrong, but we're trying.
It's very interesting what you say about leather, because is it better to buy something that is vegan, or perhaps look at a secondhand product where maybe you have a little bit more information on where that leather came from, so to speak, which is tricky when it's secondhand.
But I mean, bear in mind, secondhand's great because it's already out there. So even if it's not great and wasn't sourced that well, keep reusing something you have. I mean, that's it. It really goes back to, we just launched this big campaign on waste, and it goes back to common sense, which is that stop making new, using it for 5 minutes and shoving it into landfill. That's the bit that makes no sense at all. The cost and the effort and the energy and the resource that's used is just, it doesn't make any sense. So buy lovely things, spend more on fewer things and wear them for years and years, and then keep them in circulation by reusing them in the second-hand market or making them into something else or recycling them into something else. So it's just common sense. It's not rocket science. My grandmothers talked about waste not, want not, and they talked about make, do and mend. Those things are really relevant.
So let's talk a little bit now about the fashion industry. Obviously, it's been 13 years since launch of I'm Not a Plastic Bag. Do you think that we've improved at all in terms of our consumption becoming more sustainable?
Yes, I think there's loads of work I'm loving now, but just the sort of transparency that people share on how things are made. I think that the materials that are available, there's a brilliant organisation called the Sustainable Angle, where you can go as a designer and all the fabrics are sustainably sourced. So, it's a very pragmatic and practical approach. It's just offering alternatives. So there's loads and loads of work that's happened. And I think there's really an improvement and an awareness as well. So things are really happening, which is fantastic. Could we do more? Yes. I think the word disposable should be banned, really, when you go and see how that waste is treated and how we manage to deal with it. It's just such a huge resource. But it's not all bad. I'm a positive person. So I think with energy, creativity and innovation, we can do a huge amount.
Now, I know that you briefly touched on this in another question, but the concept of plastic circulation, how can brands utilize this to be more sustainable?
Well, quite simply, if you have, so there's, as I think I said, there's 8 billion tons of plastic on the planet now, apparently. And so there's all that plastic already out there. And just rather than shove that into landfill, how can we just keep reusing that? Now, the issue with reusing things that already exist, it's often more expensive. And we're doing a project on trying to use up leather waste, because there's a lot of leather waste that goes into landfill because people don't, when you get a skin, you cut the middle and often the bits around the edge, they often get used for straps and for bases and so on, but a lot of it just gets put into the bin. So we're trying to say, look, actually, let's take that leather and let's make it into something beautiful. Problem is, it's much more expensive to take all the little cuts, which are all different sizes, to actually laser cut them, to hand polish them, to stitch them together like a beautiful patchwork. That's more expensive than just getting a new skin, cutting it without all the patchwork, without all the repurposing, moving it around, the other route. So it's about educating people, I think, and making people enthusiastic for reusing and also being prepared to pay a bit more for it. And there's the rub, as they say, because people, especially, COVID situation, everyone's probably feeling not that rich at the moment. So how can we persuade people to pay a bit more? I think there's two things. We need to ask companies to probably make a bit less money and people to pay a bit more so that you kind of meet in the middle. But I think if you look at it, that if you make 10 purchases a year or whatever that might be, how about you make 5, but you buy better things that last longer and you wear them more?
You mentioned COVID-19 just now. What sort of impact has it had on sustainability and environmental aspect of the industry?
Well, I think always the problem with any massive shock to the world's ecosystem in almost every respect is it probably puts it further down the agenda. Honestly, I think that everyone's focusing on jobs and trying to stay healthy and to kind of continue life as they knew it. It's been quite hard. So that's the first thing. I think, though, there's been actually there's nothing good that comes out of a global pandemic, for sure. But, if you look at it, it's weird. Nature, through this situation, has grounded planes and closed down factories and stopped people moving and traveling and made people rethink a life that's digital. And that, in its own ways, is actually quite brilliant. So it's made us all realize what we can do without perhaps the damage to the planet. So, I think if you look at what we've all achieved collectively for COVID in terms of significant changes to our lives, we can do an awful lot for the planet. So it should inspire us, I think, and make us think a bit differently. It will be, and they always say, never waste a good crisis. And this is not a good crisis, it's a horrid crisis. But it would be a great shame if we come out the way we went in, I think. So I think it's incumbent on all of us to say, how can we perhaps adapt the way we work? And, whether that's traveling less or, there's so much you can do now, and as we are in this call now, that can be very effective and actually, frankly, save a lot of time, money, effort, energy, and pollution. It's sort of a no-brainer, really. So I think it's probably made us all stop and think.
Are there any other initiatives? You've touched on a few that you're working on as a brand to be more sustainable, or any other sort of causes that you're championing that you can share with us or will be doing in the near future?
We're looking at all sorts of things, from our packaging to how we work with paper, FSC certified, to sort of cellulose tape, to, really just every time we find something, we're kind of cracking in, is there a better way? So that's been really, really important. We had an interesting time during the the lockdown here in London, in that we had a call from the Royal Marsden Hospital, which is one of the world famous cancer hospital that does more research than anyone I think in the world. They're incredible what they do, saying help, we need help on PPE. So rather than actually rushing out to source more paper, disposable PPE, we actually helped with a huge amount of support from lots of brands and donors to make 6,500 hospital gowns, but out of washable fabric. So, it was great because it gave them a source of PPE that was then sustainable, because, obviously they can wash it like nurses used to. They'd boil their uniforms and have them fresh the next day. So they would wash them on site. And once they have that PPE, then they don't need it again. So it's just really trying to find, areas that we can lend a hand to. And in that situation, we sort of lent our logistics and our supply chain knowledge and our R&D and our sort of ability to kind of connect to donors to try and, make a difference. So lots of projects have been working on. And another one actually also for intensive care teams here in the UK. They needed something to hold their stuff during the day on these long shifts. So we worked with them to do that. So lots of nice charitable projects as well, which were really satisfying to do when you sort of felt like just staying at home didn't feel quite enough somehow.
That's really excellent to hear. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me. Just before I let you go, is there anything else at all that you'd like to add?
No, other than I have to say I am missing traveling. I'd so love to be out in the region, actually. I find it so inspiring. And so we need to keep collaborating and keep traveling through Zoom, I think, probably, so that we all stay in touch. But no, nothing more to add, but it's been lovely to chat. Thank you for having me.
Perfect. Thank you so much for speaking with me.